All good, Sudan.
All good? Okay, great. Thank you, Hicham. Hello everyone. For this fourth season of Morocco AI webinar, I'm very excited and happy to meet you again and to host this very first episode of this fourth season. And I have the pleasure to you have with us Dr. Hicham Badri, who accepted our invitation. Thank you very much, Dr. Hicham Badri. For this very first webinar of 2024, Dr. Hicham Badri will talk to us about a new technique, a new quantization technique for large machine learning models called HQQ. HQQ stands for Half-Quadratic Quantization. So I'll let Dr. Hicham Badri tell you more about this new and exciting, actually, technique and way of quantizing large machine learning models. But before that, I will read to you Dr. Hicham Badri's biography. He's a research scientist specializing in computer vision and large language models. He holds a PhD from Université de Bordeaux INRIA. During his doctoral studies, he focused on developing efficient optimization methods for machine learning applications, earning him the AFRIF Best PhD Award in 2015. Following his PhD, Dr. Badri contributed to diverse computer vision applications spanning online shopping to photography. And currently, he serves as the co-founder and principal scientist at Mobius Labs, a Berlin-based machine learning startup. In this role, he concentrates on the convergence of vision and language. Thank you again, Dr. Hicham Badri, for accepting our invitation, and the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Ridwan, for the invitation, and thanks everyone for joining in. And yeah, I'm very excited to present our work about quantization. I'll just put the slides here. Let's see. Oh, yeah. It's like for some reason, like cannot make it full screen for. Oh yeah, now it works.
Yes, great.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah.
Amazing.
Thank you. So yeah, very excited to present our work on model quantization that we have published just a few weeks ago, and it's called half-quadratic quantization. So just to start with, I'm very sure that many of you that work with large language models have seen this error, which is CUDA out of memory, which is probably the most annoying error you can get, which typically happens when you try to load very large models and they don't fit your GPU memory. And we have been seeing this explosion in terms of model size, especially since 2020, with the release of more powerful GPUs. And currently we have models that have 70 billion parameters, and they are considered normal models. So for example, if you want to run the Llama 270B model, you need about 140 gigabytes just for inference. So it cannot even fit in a single A100. And things get much worse when you try to actually train these models. So a lot of people have been thinking about this issue, and this talk is about how to potentially solve this issue with a compression technique called quantization, which is very, very popular right now. And it allows a lot of people to run these very big models on consumer GPUs, which is great for the open source community and smaller companies. So what is weight-only quantization? So quantization is basically a compression technique. And basically what we do is for each linear layer, we try to compress these weights. And this way, they take much less memory on the GPU. So for a normal linear layer, for example, when you do the forward pass, you just do a math bill. So X is your input, W are your weights, and you add the bias. But with the quantized version, actually, what you need to do is to decompress these weights. So you get WR, you do the math mill, and you add your bias, and then you delete that from memory. So you have to do this for each layer, linear layer, and at each forward pass. So it's a bit slower. There are actually ways to make it even faster, but this is basically the logic. So there are actually a lot of challenges with this. The main problem is that when you quantize and compress, you lose quality. There's the issue of the processing time because depending on the technique, to get those quantized weights, it can take even hours to quantize large models. And again, the quantization step can actually take some extra time. And until recently, the best methods that were available, like GPTQ, the AWQ, were requiring calibration data to estimate these quantized weights, so to compress the weights. But there are some issues with that. So heavier processing, as I said, takes time, potentially hours to compress the weights. But there's also an issue, which is a bias introduced with this calibration data, because if you have a model that was trained on many, many tasks, different languages, on trillions of tokens, it's very, very difficult to get a much smaller data set that represents all these tasks. So you might get some bias issues if you don't select this calibration data properly. So in terms of quality, what makes quantization very difficult is because the distribution of the weights is a bit challenging to work with. And the issue is the outlier weights. So if you had weights that come from the same distribution, so let's say you have millions of weights that are very, very close to each other, that's actually very, very simple to quantize because you can just average them. And suddenly you can represent 1 million values with a single value. But that doesn't work like that in real life. You have outliers and you have a limited budget of bits to assign to a group of weights. And you basically need a smart way of doing that in a way that these outliers don't cause a lot of issues. So here, for example, the outlier in this case is minus 10.1 because it's value very far from the rest of the weights. So if you have, when you do this, we try to quantize this in two bits, which means that you have four values to distribute across the weights. Kind of works fine because in this case, we can give the outlier weight its own bit, 0 in this case. So you don't have many issues. But now if you reduce the precision to 1 bit, for example, so you only have 2 values, 0 and 1, to represent all these values, then you start to get some issues because you will have group of weights that contain outliers, and the distribution is you cannot represent those weights accurately with a single bit. So you need to do something else. And this is exactly how it looks like in real life with the language model. So let's say this is a Llama 2 7B chat model, quantized to 4 bits with a popular method. And the prompt is, how can I build a car? So ideally, you would expect a step-by-step explanation on how to achieve this task. But even answer the question. And this problem is basically due to these outliers. And what we try to do is to reduce the influence of these outliers with our method, which is called half-quadratic quantization. So now I will go through some basics and explain how the proposed method works and how it's different from the methods that are available right now. So there are different ways to quantize these weights. We are going to focus on linear quantization. And linear quantization is basically a very simple way to quantize and dequantize weights. So it's a linear operation. So your weights are W. You need what is called the scaling point and 0 point. So these are vectors. And to quantize, you basically divide by this S and you add this Z and you get WQ. So you have to run the weight. So you get integers. And when you want to dequantize, it's a linear operation. So it's just the inverse. So the goal here is to find WQ or S and Z that represent most accurately the original weights. And the popular way to do this is basically using the Elgin norm to reduce the error between the activations. Reduce the activation error between the original weights and their quantized version. So here X is the input. So these are input features that will come from calibration data. W are the original weights. And we want that when we dequantize these weights and we do the matmul with X, we want the error to be as close as possible. So you can do this with the Elgin norm to represent the error, which makes the math very easy because it's much easier to work with the Elgin norm. And this is actually how GPTQ models this error. And GPTQ is just a very popular method that is available right now, and it's used a lot by the community. However, there's a couple of issues with this formulation. So as I said, these outliers create issues, and they are actually not reflected in the Gaussian distribution. So when you use the Elgin norm, you basically suppose that your error follows a Gaussian distribution, and that's actually not true in this case because we have these outliers. So that's why we try to rethink this formulation. So we changed the optimization problem. So the first thing that we get rid of is the X. So we don't want to use calibration data for many reasons. The first thing is when you use calibration data, you have these problems, bias, processing time. And also, if you don't have calibration data, you can pretty much use this approach on any model you want. Vision model, language model, audio model, doesn't matter. The second thing that we do is that we change this Elgin norm to something that would reflect the distribution of these outliers. So we need a skewed distribution. So we use the hyper-Laplacian distribution, which is like widely used in computer vision. And we also do instead of looking for WQ directly, we actually look for this S and Z, these parameters, which are actually easier because they are floating points, but WQ is actually integer. So it just makes the math a little bit easier. So all of this good, but the problem is that now we end up with a non-convex problem, and it doesn't have a closed form solution. So we need a solver to do this properly. So actually, the very first version that we did was using PyTorch with AutoGrad, and we used the L1 norm. And it was actually working, but it was taking a lot of time. And that's why we had to actually write a solver, because also with the AutoGrad, it was not working at all with LP less than 1 because the problem is non-convex. So that's why we actually, in some cases, it's much better to do the math and write the solver instead of using just by AutoGrad directly. So the math is actually very easy. It looks a bit scary, but it's actually very simple. And the solver that we are going to use is called half-quadratic optimization. And the idea is very simple, is that you just introduce an additional variable. So in this case, WE. And the goal of this additional variable is that it will allow us to split the big problem into subproblems that are actually easier to solve separately. So here we just add WE. Another thing here is that we fix S and we optimize only for Z, just to make the math a little bit easier here. And so here now we need to optimize for Z and WE, and we just split it into subproblems. So iteratively, so we optimize for WE, and then we optimize for Z. We update this beta here, and we just run this iteratively. So SP1, the solution to this is actually taking the form what's called the proximal operator. I will not go really into details about this. I would just say that it's actually very, very well studied optimization problem. So we already know that this solution is actually good because we have tested this solution for different applications in computer vision. So this solution is actually not new. And in other terms, actually, the solution is just the shrinking operator. So if you're familiar with the L1 norm, if you put P equals to 1, this is just the soft thresholding operator, which is used in the L1 norm. So this solution is just a generalized version of the LP norm. And this is just a first order solution, just to make this clear. You cannot get, there's no closed form to this. This is just a first order approximation. So you do Taylor expansion, you get the first order approximation of LP norm, and you solve it, and you get this solution. But this actually is quite a good solution. We know this from the literature. So the second problem is actually easier because there's no projection. It's using the L2 norm. So the solution is actually just the average along the axis. So I forgot to mention is that we actually don't work with the weights directly. We actually reshape them to what is called the group size. And this group size basically controls how many weights are grouped together. And each group size will have its own scaling and scaling point and 0 point, sorry. So these are scalars. So basically, think about it as you take the weights and then you reshape them, and you would get number of rows would be the group size, and the number of columns would be the number of groups that you have. For each one of them, you would have a scaling point and 0 point. So scaling point is a vector, 0 point is a vector. So that's why I'm saying here along the axis, because once you do this WQ minus WE divided by S, this is a matrix. So you need to average across the rows to get this set. So this is actually the code, very, very simple. So basically what you do iteratively is that you quantize this. It's a linear operation. Dequantize is another linear operation. You just shrink it. And you calculate this average of the 0 point. So very simple. You do this iteratively. It typically takes like 5 or 7 iterations to converge. This is the nice thing about half-quadratic quantization and ADMM. These optimizers are very, very efficient, and they take much less iterations than gradient descent, for example. So this simple solution is actually over 100 times faster than PyTorch AutoGrad. And as I mentioned before, this AutoGrad, actually you can only run it with P equals 1. If you have P less than 1, wouldn't work well. So now we know how to get this WQ and this S and Z, but the issue here is that we still need to store this WQ as 4 bits or 2 bits or 3 bits. Because when you do this, this WQ is actually still a floating point. And to actually store this in memory as a 4-bit or 2-bit or 3-bit, you need to do something to these floating points. The problem is that there's no native type as 4-bit or 2-bit or 3-bit. I mean, they are actually working on it, but currently there's nothing like that. So in PyTorch. So the lowest one is 8 bits. So what we need to do is what is called bit packing, which is basically packing values together in 8 bits or 32 bits. And this is an example, this is an example for 4-bit bit packing. So we have this WQ here is 4 bits, so you have values between 0 and 15. So since they are 4 bits, we can store two 4-bit values into one single 8-bit. And how you do this with simple bit shifting and logical operators. So once you do this, so these blue ones they will be stored in a single 8-bit value, and these yellow ones we do the same thing, and you can unpack them without losing any accuracy. And the code is very simple, just bit shift. And then when you want to unpack them, you just do masking and shifting. So very simple. For 3 bits, you actually lose 2 bits because you only can store 10 3-bit in one 32-bit. And also the thing to keep in mind is that if you use int32, for example, it's actually much slower than packing things in 8 bits. So the choice of the bit packing is actually very important, and this actually takes most of the time to dequantize is this part, is to unpack the bits. So I will summarize very quickly the steps that I have been talking about. So on the quantization step, you have your model on CPU, you have some quantization parameters like how many bits you want, and this group size I've been talking about, like what is the size of that. So you move the weights to the GPU, you initialize WQ, S, and Z, optimize, bit pack. You can also quantize this S and Z if you want. You get your quantized model. And now for inference step, you have your input data, you have this quantized model on GPU, and for each forward pass and for each linear layer, you unpack WQ, you dequantize S and Z, get an estimate, reconstruction estimate of W, which is WR with this linear operator. You do your math mule and you remove WR from memory. Right. So this is for inference. So what about training? How can we do training with this? We need to do something on the backward pass, because the problem is that in PyTorch, when you do the forward pass, there's something called the context, and it would keep track of which tensors need the backward pass. And what happens is that once you dequantize these weights, these dequantized weights will be stored in memory, and once you want to train, it does the backward pass and you get out of memory. So what you need to do is to rewrite the backward pass and force it to dequantize the weights every time. So we dequantize the weights for the forward pass, and then we have to dequantize them again for the backward pass. So unfortunately, there's no other way of doing it so far, because this context is caching everything. And that's the only way so far to avoid this CUDA out of memory. But at least this will allow you to train models with very limited resources, instead of not being able to train it at all. So let's talk about some benchmarks here. So first thing here, I'm going to talk about processing time against some popular methods like GPTQ, AWQ. The nice thing is that with this solver, the HQQ solver, it makes things very, very fast. So we can optimize Llama 270B in under 5 minutes, so about 4 minutes, which is more than 50 times faster than GPTQ, which is very, very popular method used by the community. And it takes like less than 1 minute for the 7B. The nice thing about this is that you don't even have to store the quantized models. So you can just quantize it on the fly, and you can decide on the fly which quantization settings you want. Because the problem is that when you quantize for 4 bits, you need to store that model. If you want to quantize for 3 bits, you need to store that model again, and you would have duplicates of multiple models. So you can do this on the fly with our method, which is very nice. Other thing worth mentioning is the quality. So here we have a graph of different Llama 2 models quantized with different methods and with different bits. So there are 2 messages here that I would like to mention. So obviously comparison with other methods. So even though the proposed method doesn't use any calibration data, the results are actually comparable or sometimes better than methods that use calibration data. So here we want this perplexity to be low, and we want the memory to be low. So the ideal model should be very close to this area. So the other thing that is actually very interesting is that we noticed that large models quantized perform better than smaller model and quantized. And that was actually a surprise for 2-bit models, because before this release, the 2-bit models were not working very well. They were unusable. And what is great is that now the 2-bit models are actually catching up. And now, even the past few weeks, there have been new methods that do even a better job quantizing these 2 bits, these models to 2 bits. We actually noticed the same thing also for vision models. So as I have mentioned, you can use this quantization approach for any model, not just language, but also for vision or audio, which is great. But GPTQ and AWQ, for example, they are only working with language models, LLMs. So here we actually noticed the same thing. This is the 0-shot top 1 accuracy on open clip with different sizes. So the bigger bubble, the bigger model. So here this is a fit H, and then you have fit L, and then you have fit B. And here what we notice is that, again, like the bigger models quantized to 2 bits are actually better than the full precision smaller models. So same thing that we noticed with the Llama 2 models, and the fit H models. So the bigger models are actually more resistant to 2-bit quantization, which is very aggressive. So smaller models are actually still struggling with 2 bits. But also keep in mind that this is the 0-shot accuracy, and it's the top 1 0-shot. So it's a very aggressive and sensitive metric, but we really wanted to see how these quantized models perform under strict metrics. And looks like they work for both language and vision. Another thing worth mentioning is that you don't have to use the same quantization settings for all the layers, especially for certain types of models. So mixtures of experts is a good example, where you can use lower bits for the experts and higher bits for the attention models, and it just works basically the same in terms of memory, but you have much better quality. And with that, you can actually run the Mixtral 87B on a single 24 gigabyte GPU, which is great. So Mixtral is one of the best models available right now, and it's great that you can run that model on a single 24 gigabyte GPU. So obviously there are some challenges. The first challenge is the quantization speed, because it's some additional compute that you have to do. So for now, we rely on torch compile to speed up inference, but there are some issues with that. First, the compilation takes a lot of time, and if you change the byte size or you change the context length, it tends to recompile sometimes, which is a bit annoying. And caching this compiled Triton kernels is actually very tricky. We have been talking to the PyTorch community to try to figure this out, but for the moment there's no solution, so we are still looking at it. So apparently there's a solution, but it's a bit hacky to do it. The other solution is to write CUDA kernels or Triton kernels, which takes some time, some expertise. And the problem is that even if you write it, it might not run fast on all the GPUs. So have some example here of the auto AWQ kernels, which are popularly used in with AWQ, and they were great on your GPUs, but then you try to run it on some Titan RTX, which is a little bit older GPU, and they actually run slower. And also, like Triton, if it's not written in a way that will support like other GPUs, you can also get like much slower inference. So here, like PyTorch compile is still actually faster here in this case, but there are still some faster kernels that we haven't experimented with. So XLlama V2, very fast kernel, but we need to see if it's actually compatible with the quantization approach. And so far, it also only supports 4 bits. So we want also to work with 3 bits and 2 bits. Smaller models still struggle with quantization with 2 bits, for example, as I have shown with FIT 32B. And lower group sizes will make this scaling point and 0 point much larger, so you would have additional memory, and you will not achieve this 2-bit quantization. So it's actually, the weights are 2 bits, but you need to store some extra metadata, which makes the overall average not 2-bit. It actually takes a little bit more GPU memory, and that's why we have been working on something a little bit better. So this is not released yet, still work in progress, and this is just an improved version of HQQ. So basically it adds support for calibration if you have access to data calibration, and this is especially useful if you have a very small model and you want to really quantize it to very low bits. So basically we use the LoRa for calibration, and additionally what we do is that we offload this scaling 0 point to the CPU, so we achieve this true n-bit quantization size on the GPU side, and we need to transfer this scaling 0 point from the CPU and GPU every time. But if they are small enough, it's actually not a big deal. So there's an example comparing with Whip-Sharp 2-bit. So this is one of the best 2-bit methods available right now as well. So with HQQ, the quality is a bit better. So perplexity 0.31, which is better, but it takes more GPU memory because of this scaling at 0 point. So we can offload that to the CPU, so we get 2.9 gigabytes, which is very close to 2.72. It actually needs to be the same, but for some reason it's a bit higher. But what we do is that with the calibration data, we can also improve the quality with so you can see that the perplexity is going down as we reduce this group size, but this group size will make the model, the metadata only will make it bigger, and it will take a little bit more time to transfer the data to the CPU, but you get the quality that you need. So 561 perplexity on Wikitext with the 2-bit 7 billion parameter model is actually very, very good. And you can basically choose which processing time you're comfortable with. and versus which quality you're comfortable with this approach. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. I put here some links, so feel free to visit the blog post where we explain things a little bit more in details. We have all the code available, open source. If you have any technical question on the code, for example, you can post it on the issues on GitHub. We have pre-quantized weights that you can use directly. This method is also integrated in some packages like the Obaboga package, which is very popular. So you can, if you just want to use a quantized model, you can just use that directly. And it's also used in the mixed trial offloading package, which allows you to run mixed trial models on a single GPU, which is a great tool to do that. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. And thank you very much for your attention, and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hicham Badri. Right on time, very interesting presentation. And yes, now time for questions. So we did receive so many questions. Some of them I think you already answered them near the end of your presentation, but let me ask them anyway. So first question, can we use your method to compress VIT-based models, vision transformer-based models? I think you already answered about that. And what were the challenges compared with the works on LLMs?
Yeah, I mean, the VIT, VIT models which are presented here, they actually was surprised that it just worked out of the box. So on our blog post, we have detailed numbers for zero-shot performance on ImageNet, but also when you fine-tune. So I was not expecting it to work well with zero-shot, so it just worked out of the box, which is great. But the challenge is really these small models. They are still quite difficult to quantize. But you actually don't need to go like to 2 bits with smaller models. Like you can just use 4 bits, which should be fine. But for very large models, you can use 2 bits, which just works. Yeah, I mean, it just worked. That's it.
Yeah, that's good news. So yeah, let me go to the second question. How did you determine the optimal value of the sparsity promoting parameter P in the LP norm? And could this value change depending on the type of data or model being quantized?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. The answer is it doesn't matter much as long as you're between around 0.7. So we use 0.7 by default. So the problem is the instability with FP16. So I'll show you this like in the code. So the problem is, you can see here that I put this star here and say the scale is inverted in the implementation due to FP16 stability issues. Because normally we need to divide by the scale, not multiply. The problem is that there are a lot of instabilities with FP16. So these scaling values, they tend to be actually quite small. And when you invert them, you get very large values. And with FP16, you can only have values up to like 2 multiplied by 10 to the power 4 or something like this. So you start to go over that value, and it creates a lot of issues. So when you use a P that is smaller than 0.7, you tend to have this issue. So it's not because it's not because the math is wrong. It's just because of these stability issues, because we have to do this in float 16 to make it very fast. If you do it in like float 32 or 64, it's going to be a bit slower, but it's going to be more stable. And so that's why 0.7, 0.8 should be fine. I haven't seen like a big difference. Like as long as you're like lower than 1,
We cannot hear you anymore, Dr.
sorry, I
Hicham.
didn't
Yeah.
catch that.
There was a bit of a lag, I think. So
Yeah,
I
sorry
don't.
about that.
Yeah. So probably can you maybe repeat just the last 10 seconds of your answer?
Oh yeah, sorry. So I said that as long I have noticed that like P around 0.7, 0.8 should work fine. If you go below it, you start to get some issues because of these FP16 stability problems.
Okay.
Yeah, but the math is should be correct because like in other applications, like in computer vision, when you use LP norm, you tend to have better results with lower P. But in this case, it's just a stability issue.
Okay. So since you are on this slide, there was a question about the kappa mentioned in the last line. So can you maybe remind us what does kappa stands for here?
Yeah, so let me go to the slides, back to the optimization here. So kappa is basically a value which is strictly larger than 1. So you can use 1.01 or whatever. So if you use higher values of kappa, you converge faster. But the quality is worse. If you use lower values, you need more iterations to converge, but you get better quality, if it makes sense. So it needs to be more than 1. And the reason for that is because you want this beta to tend into infinity. And the reason why you want beta to tend into infinity is because you want this thing, this quantization error to be, we want the WE to be as close as possible to the original thing that you have repressed with, which is the quantization residual. So it's just a standard thing that you do. So in the code, it's hard-coded to 1.01, I think. Yeah, it's
Okay, great. Yeah. So let me take maybe 3 maximum last questions because time is running out. So one quick question, very very easy, I think. What about vision models based on CNN like YOLO? Does HQQ work here too? And did you try it?
I haven't tried it, so I don't know. But you don't need quantization for these models because they don't take a lot of memory because they have convolutions.
Yeah.
So you don't need to quantize a model that is only few millions of parameters, like 10 or 20. The problem is with the transformer models because they have linear layers. And linear layers, they take a lot of, they need a lot of weights. So they have millions of weights, billions of parameters in total. So you don't need to quantize those weights to start with. So
Yeah. So on next question, how can we measure quality loss due to quantization? What are the metrics? Maybe this is the question.
yeah, so the popular metric, which I don't like, personally, I don't like, but we have to use it, is perplexity so for language model, the popular one is perplexity, which is we here. And it's basically, you want this perplexity to be lower. It's actually very close to the loss, the cross entropy loss. It's based on the cross entropy loss. And the lower this perplexity is, the better the model is. This is the popular way of doing it, and that's why all the papers that for about model quantization for language models, they use this. I personally don't like it because you're just measuring basically the loss on the validation set. Better way to do it is to use some LLM benchmark like Arc Challenge or something like that. For vision models, we just use the ImageNet zero-shot accuracy and top one, top five accuracy with linear probing. So how is the model without any training performs? So that would be the zero-shot accuracy. And how does the quantized model perform as a backbone, frozen backbone, when you just train a classifier on top of it? So we have both results on the blog post. And that's pretty much how you evaluate computer vision based models. So we follow the same thing.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that answer. And I do have one very general question here. How the TinyML community can benefit from these advances?
Yeah, that's a great question. Ideally, being able to push this quantization to even 1 bit, that would be great. To even push these limits further, because right now we only use up to trying to find the slides. And like with 2 bits, Llama 7B is actually still struggling. So there's that. But as I said, we have this version like the HQ plus, which improves the accuracy for smaller bits. But I mean, yeah, like I hope that will be like very useful for TinyML community to use this and try to make models, context models run with this. But I don't know what kind of models people in that community will be interested in. I can tell you about the open source LLM community. They all want to run the biggest models on consumer GPUs. And that's what we have been focusing more, like stuff like running Mixtral on a single GPU and things like that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, there is a very nice TinyML community in Morocco, and I think they
Oh
can
yeah.
reach out to you, Hicham, directly if they have questions, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Great. So, yeah, two last questions, very quick. One is, I think, is very easy. Where can we find the source code for your work, and if there is a publication? So, yeah, this is already shown. So they need to go to the blog, and the code is shown also here. So, yeah, please note the website or come back to the video when it will be online on YouTube for that. And the last question is what is your advice for researchers based in Morocco that would like to work in this field? This is a tricky question, maybe.
Yeah, my advice uh for everyone, not just in Morocco, but everyone, is read as many papers as you can, because there's a lot of information in these papers, and the more you read, the more inspiration you can get. And just try to find the thing that clicks with you. Maybe like training very, very large models is not achievable for most people, and but you can find something else. Just try to read as many papers as possible. Try to also play with the small models yourself. I personally don't trust models that say, "Oh, we achieve X on leaderboard," and then you use the model and it's not working properly. So always try to do things yourself. Try to play with models. Hugging Face is a great platform to get started with and play with all these models. they have quantization techniques. We are trying to add, by the way, HQQ to transformers, so people would be able to use HQQ directly in Hugging Face, which would be great, but it's still work in progress. So yeah, I mean, just reading as many papers as you can, keep track of the new models, and because it's just going way too fast, even for me, very difficult to keep track of things. So Twitter could be also a good source to get updates, and also form a community where you can exchange information, like new papers, new techniques, new models. Yeah.
On this very inspiring note, I think, yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Hicham Badri, for this very nice,
My pleasure.
informative